Greetings. Here's a question you probably don't get asked very often. Have you heard about the Vatican's Solitreo Qur'an? What if I told you that the Vatican Library has a 14th century manuscript containing the Arabic text of the Qur'an written in basically a Sephardic Hebrew cursive script? Would you want to see it? Well, this is the Vatican's digital library, the website which provides public access to scans of thousands of documents at the Vatican Library. And not only have they scanned thousands of manuscripts and codices and made them publicly available, but they've even organized a great many of them by language, or in some cases, including this case, by script. Now, look at this list here on the left. As you can see here, they offer a couple hundred Arabic documents. There are also a few dozen Aramaic documents. Now, I took a look at that section. They're specifically Syrian Aramaic documents, Syriac documents. They have a bunch of Coptic manuscripts. They also have a few dozen Ethiopian manuscripts. They have over 1,000 Greek documents, and unsurprisingly, they have several thousand Latin documents. They even have a few Samaritan manuscripts. But relevant to this video, the site also offers access to several hundred Hebrew documents, which again are housed in the Vatican Library. And in this video, we'll be looking at a book listed in that section. As was alluded to earlier, the document is not written in the Hebrew language, but it is written in a cursive Hebrew script, specifically Solitreo, a type of Sephardic cursive. And that seems to be why it's listed among the Hebrew manuscripts rather than the Arabic manuscripts, because of its script. It's essentially Judeo-Arabic, written in the Solitreo script, in the Sephardic Hebrew cursive. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and so we're going to be specifically looking for the manuscript has the label VAT.EBR.357. So VAT for Vatican, EBR for Hebrew, and then 357 being the number of the manuscript. Bear with me here. We're going to scroll down, and I should find it in a moment. Once we do, I'll click on it. We're almost there, and here we go, right about, there we go, got it. And now we'll go in, and here's the manuscript. It's listed as being written in the year 1400, or completed in the year 1400, so I called it a 14th century manuscript because I figure it was composed over the last years of the 1300s. This is it here, that you can see its spine there. It's several hundred pages long, and interestingly enough, the first 100 pages are not the Quran. It's a medical text written in Spain by a Spanish author, also in Solitreo. But here's the text. I'm going to start at the 3rd chapter of the Quran. And now, as this is the 3rd chapter of the Quran, the chapter heading reads Surat al-Imran. The word surah ends with a hey rather than a tau, and I'm guessing the reader is supposed to think of that hey as a ta morbuta and know when to pronounce it as a t and when to pronounce it, silently or like an h. But whatever the case, let's take a look at the opening line of the chapter, the basmala. And the first thing I want to point out is this character here, which is a special ligature combining both the aleph and the lamed, right? You see, Judeo-Arabic formed this character because those two characters, aleph and lamed, are written together so often, for example, in the definite article of every noun that has a definite article, and of course at the start of the word Allah, and so on, right? When you're writing in Arabic, you're constantly writing alif and lam, right? Or if you're writing it in the Hebrew characters, aleph, lamed, right? And now, if we transcribe this portion into the now standard square or Ashuri characters, Hebrew characters, we get this. You may notice that the aleph lamed ligature that I just mentioned appears 3 times. So expanding it out into a separate aleph and lamed in each case, we get this. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. And now, if we move over to the opening verse, after the alif lam mim, those opening letters that start many chapters of the Quran, we find this. Allah, la ilaha illa huwa, God. There is no God but Him or He. I thought some might find that interesting. And now, if you'll bear with me, I'd like to scroll over to the 45th verse, which mentions Jesus Christ. And again, we're in the third chapter of the Quran, Surat al-Imran. Admittedly, the verses are not numbered, so if you're looking for a particular verse, you have to do so based on your familiarity with the text. But here we go. This is the text that refers to al-Masih, Isa bin, and then it cuts off because it's the end of the line. Right? And quick note, by the way, on how his name is spelled. Interestingly, it uses a yod at the end, where the Arabic text would have an alif maqsura, which has the graphical form of a ya, or the Arabic's equivalent of a yod, but nonetheless functions like an alif. Whatever the case, this line ends, as I said, with the word bin for son. So we have to scroll over to the first word of the next line to find the reference to his mother, Maryam. And when you combine the end of the first line with the beginning of the second line, you get al-Masih Isa bin Maryam, the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary. Okay, and with that, I'd like to scroll now to another chapter. I'm going to jump all the way to Surat al-Tawba, just to look at the beginning over there. Yeah, here we go. Let me just zoom in on the chapter heading here. So this is the 9th chapter of the Quran, and it's known as Surat al-Tawba, right? And something I found interesting is if you look at the top, above the word Tawba, one can see smaller characters with the Hebrew translation, Teshuba. Right? Both of them mean something like return or repentance, something like that, right? However, in this text, this is interesting, the basmala also appears at the start of this chapter, right? In a standard Quran, the basmala appears at the start of every chapter except the 9th chapter, except this one, Surat al-Tawba. However, as I said, in this text, the basmala also appears, unlike in a standard Quran. More interesting, the basmala here switches scripts in the middle of the sentence. Notice how Bismillah ar-Rahman is written in the Hebrew characters. The first 3 words are written in Hebrew characters, or Solitreo characters. But the last word, ar-Rahim, is written in Arabic characters. I personally find that quite interesting. That's why I wanted to point it out. I hope you find it interesting as well. And now I'm just going to go ahead and scroll over to the end of the text. And by the way, I probably should have mentioned that the pages are listed as recto and verso. So it's, you'll see it listed as like 150 something pages, but really it's 300 pages. But I'm going to the very end of the Quran, the end of the work. And here we have the 112th chapter of the Quran, Surat al-Ikhlas, which is one of the most well-known and most discussed chapters of the corpus. And I suppose we can take a closer look at the text. I figured some would find that interesting. So, of course, there's the chapter heading here, Surat al-Ikhlas. Oh, I just noticed I put a Tau instead of a Hey, but whatever. I hope you'll forgive me for that. Then, of course, you have the Basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, right? In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Then, of course, the very famous opening verse that I'm sure anyone, even non-Muslims, if you've talked to Muslims, you've probably had several quote this to you. Qul huwa Allah ahad. Amazingly, I recently saw a homeless gentleman, a gentleman who was panhandling on the train, recite this surah from memory. I thought that was interesting, and of course he recited it much better than me, because my command of Arabic is terrible. But nonetheless, so yeah, that says, say he is God, one, or he's the one God, and then it's Allahu Samad. I guess God the Eternal. I have a lot to say on the word Samad. It's interesting when you think of it in the context of a related biblical Hebrew term, but that's discussion for another time. Then let's see, the famous verse that many interpret as a polemic against the belief that Christ is the begotten Son of God. I'm not saying it is, but this is the popular interpretation. So I'm saying with regard to God, it says, Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He doesn't beget, nor was he begotten, so it has it in the active and the passive. And then the final verse, walam yakun lahu, forgive me, got to go to the end, walam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, and there's none that are equal to him, right? So that's Surat al-Ikhlas in the Vatican's Solitreo Quran. And then, if we scroll down a bit, we can skip to the last chapter of the Quran, the 114th chapter of the Quran, which is Surat al-Nas. which I wanted to look at just briefly for a second because, as those who are familiar with my channel know, it's come up several times in my previous videos. I won't go over every verse like I just did for Surat al-Ikhlas, but because the third verse, the verse that reads al-Nas, was part of several of my past videos, I'll at least transcribe it that far and do a close-up of that portion. So I guess we can zoom in. Here's the chapter heading, right? Surat al-Nas. This time I actually put the hey instead of the tau. I got that one right. And then, of course, it begins like all the chapters do in this text with the basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Interestingly, though, this is one of several examples in the text where ar-Rahman is spelled with an extra alif within the consonantal text, not a so-called dagger alif above, but it's actually in the rasm, as you would say. It's part of the consonantal structure. There's an extra alif in ar-Rahman. And then the first verse, you'll notice, I want to point this out, there's a dot above the dalet to signify that it's the character dal instead of dal, right? And it reads, as everyone familiar with this text would know, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. It's telling you in the imperative to say, I seek refuge, or I take refuge in the Lord of humanity. Then the next verse refers to God as Malik Nas, the king, the ruler of humanity. And then the verse which has appeared in many of my videos, quite a few of my videos, Ilahi Nas, the God of mankind. And I could go on, but maybe we'll stop here. I don't want to bore you with my terrible recitations, my terrible attempts to read aloud the Arabic text of the Quran. Oh, and by the way, you might notice all of this other text which appears on every page. For example, all that red text at the bottom of your screen. Those are notes written in Latin by the 15th century Sicilian Jewish scholar who converted to Christianity, Flavius Mithridates, right? So apparently this text was written at the very end of the 14th century, right? Or maybe the Vatican dates it to the year 1400, and then apparently decades later, Mithridates had access to this Solitreo Quran, and he added notes in Latin to every page. And in fact, he wrote so much on each page, the manuscript also serves as like a partial Latin translation of the Quran and also a commentary on the Quran. Honestly, one could do a whole video just on the notes of Mithridates. And with that, I guess I'll stop here with this short introduction and brief look at the Vatican Library's medieval Solitreo Quran. And, of course, I'll share a link in the video description for interested viewers who want to peruse it at their leisure. So on that note, as always, I look forward to the comments of others. God bless.